Multiple surveys and reports show schools are seeing a rise in fights and threats, not just between students, but teachers also now report feeling less safe as they face the threat of attacks from students. While the lingering effects of the pandemic, school shutdowns have played a major role. Some educators report their district's restorative justice practices to discipline students also has become a disaster. Well, joining us now to discuss is Parents Defending Education's Director of Outreach, Erika Sanzi. Erika, good morning to you. I want to begin with this stat right here.
Jan.
More than 500 school districts in 48 states are using restorative justice practices in student discipline. First, let's break this down. What is restorative justice and how is it being implemented in schools?
Yeah, restorative justice is a theory of justice. It focuses on mediation and agreement rather than punishment. I think we saw it first in the criminal justice system, and it has made its way over to the schools. Many school districts moved in this direction about maybe 10 years ago or so, but certainly we've seen it increase dramatically in the most recent years. The idea is that the offenders will accept responsibility for the harm that they've caused and make restitution with victims. And again, it's one of the many things we see that does sound nice on paper in theory, but is extremely difficult to implement successfully. It requires a ton of staff. It requires people who are experts or are very skilled in de-escalation and mediation. And it requires total buy-in, not only from the students, but from the staff. And unfortunately, we just haven't seen it really work well at all.
Exactly. And you just said it right there. It requires a ton of staff. Who has a ton of staff right now anywhere in any business in this country? There are shortages everywhere, as we know, especially in the field of education. What is the purpose behind it? Because some would argue a zero-tolerance policy does not always work either. Is there a one-size-fits-all approach to every situation and every circumstance?
I mean, definitely not. I feel like having worked in schools myself for over a decade, including some that were trying this restorative justice practice, I also think any parent would be able to say, one size doesn't fit all, and certainly there needs to be discretion in terms of how we handle behaviors, which is to say there are some very minor infractions where it can work potentially. The problem that we're seeing is a focus on addressing the needs or the problems of the offenders at the expense of the majority of the students who are in classrooms wanting to learn, ready to learn, teachers that are trying to teach and they can't because there's chronic disruption in their classrooms that is not being addressed. I would also just add that we're seeing even efforts to use this, or again, pretend to use this, when safety is at risk, when there's violence, when there's fighting, and when, the basic safety of students and staff is at risk.
And a 2022 report published by the National Institutes of Health says that restorative justice practices are often used to, quote, reduce racial disparities. But however, it also notes there is little evidence demonstrating how successful they are in addressing the root of those disparities. So what is the benefit of this in schools?
I mean, this idea of disparities is crucial to understand. In 2014, the Obama administration sent what's called a Dear Colleague letter, and they basically said, we are seeing disparities in discipline data, and you schools need to get your house in order. And what they really were looking at were racial disparities. They didn't at all mention or care about the fact that boys were suspended much more than girls. They certainly didn't even care about the fact that Asians, had the lowest suspension rates, but they were really looking at Black and Hispanic students. And so when schools were put on notice, if you do not get rid of these disparities, you will face a federal investigation. And what we know happens is that when schools are pressured to get their data in order, they will do things to manipulate those numbers so that their data looks better. We certainly saw this with high school graduation rates. Suddenly everybody had a high graduation rate, but lots of students were graduating without basic reading and math skills. So what we saw here is a lot of the data on discipline improved. But in order for that to happen, chaos began to spill out into schools because, again, they weren't able to turn to their more serious consequences, even in the moments when they were the most necessary.
Interesting. A lot more to talk on this, a lot more to discuss. Parents Defending Education's Director of Outreach, Erika Sanzi, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining us here on this Friday. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Jan.